The Galactic Council had always presented itself as the great keeper of peace, a unifying force that ensured harmony among the many civilizations of the universe. For centuries, they had governed the affairs of countless species, controlling trade, settling disputes, and preventing wars that could disrupt the fragile balance of power. When humanity emerged from its homeworld and proved itself capable of space travel, the Council had at first dismissed them as another primitive race that would soon fade into obscurity. But humanity did not fade. They expanded, adapted, and thrived in ways no one had anticipated. Their rapid rise sent waves of unease through the great halls of the Galactic Council. Unlike many species that required thousands of years to reach interstellar prominence, humans had done it in mere centuries. Their ability to fight, to endure, to innovate, it was unnatural. And to those in power, it was terrifying. The council members debated endlessly on what should be done. Some believed that humanity should be welcomed, that their strength could be an asset rather than a threat. But the ruling elite knew better. They had seen what happened when a race grew too powerful. It upset the delicate equilibrium. And if humanity was allowed to continue its ascent, the council itself could lose control. So a plan was formed in the shadows of grand halls and whispered meetings. The humans had to be stopped, but war was not an option. A direct conflict would be too costly, and the humans had already proved themselves formidable in battle. No, this war would not be fought with weapons. It would be fought with betrayal. With careful precision, the Council devised a scheme that would shatter humanity's strength from within. They extended a hand of friendship, inviting Earth's leaders to join the Council as equals. They spoke of alliances, of cooperation, of a future where humanity could stand alongside the galaxy's oldest and most powerful races. It was a lie wrapped in the sweetest of words. Many humans believed it, desperate for a chance to secure their place in the stars. Treaties were signed, agreements were made, and humanity lowered its defenses, believing that they had finally found their place among the stars. They did not see the knives waiting in the darkness. The betrayal came without warning. One moment, humanity stood proudly among its new allies, and the next, they were drowning in fire and destruction. The very fleets they had called allies turned against them. The ships of the Galactic Council, once seen as symbols of peace, unleashed devastation upon human colonies, bombarding them into oblivion. The trade routes that had once brought prosperity were severed, leaving Earth and its outer settlements to starve. Even their closest allies among the alien races turned their backs, afraid of suffering the same fate. It was a betrayal so deep, so absolute, that it shattered the very foundation of what humanity had believed in. Earth's defenses crumbled under the sheer weight of the enemy assault. The human fleet, though strong, was unprepared for such treachery. Their ships were scattered, caught in ambushes they never saw coming. Entire squadrons were wiped out before they could even react. The proud bastions of human civilization, once beacons of progress, were reduced to ruins. Earth itself fell under occupation, its people placed under strict control by the Galactic Council. Humanity was no longer a rising power. They were broken, scattered, and left to die. The Council believed they had won. They believed that humanity had been destroyed. But they had made a grave mistake. They had underestimated the very thing that made humans so dangerous in the first place: their unbreakable will. Even as their cities burned, even as their fleets fell, the spirit of humanity did not die. In the dark corners of the galaxy, those who had survived the massacre disappeared into the void, vanishing without a trace. The Council assumed they had fled in fear, that they would never rise again. But the truth was far more terrifying. Humanity was not running. They were waiting. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for the perfect strike. Waiting to show the galaxy what it truly meant to betray them. The Galactic Council believed they had wiped out humanity. Their fleets had burned human colonies to the ground. Earth was under strict alien control, and any remaining human warships had been scattered or destroyed. The Council declared victory, confident that the threat was over. But they had not destroyed humanity. They had only created something far more dangerous. Among the ashes of betrayal and destruction, a few human ships had survived, damaged, hunted, but still breathing. These last survivors did not run aimlessly into the void, nor did they beg for mercy. Instead, they disappeared into the darkest corners of space, carrying with them the last hope of their species. The Galactic Council called them ghosts, remnants of a broken race with no future. But in reality, they were something far worse. Warriors with nothing left to lose and a plan that would shake the foundations of the galaxy itself. Admiral Eric Vasquez sat in the command chair of the Ironclad, one of the last surviving human warships. The fleet that had once stood proudly beside him was gone, lost in the betrayal that had shattered humanity. Now, all that remained were a handful of warships, damaged and running low on supplies. They had no allies, no home, and no reinforcements coming to save them. But Eric did not see defeat. He saw an opportunity. The Council thought they had won, but they had underestimated humanity's ability to endure. While the enemy celebrated, Eric and his crew were already preparing for the next phase of the war. They knew they could not face the Galactic Council in open combat. Not yet. They needed something more, something that would turn the tide. And Eric believed he had found exactly that. Deep within the uncharted regions of space, there were whispers of an ancient secret, something hidden long before the Galactic Council had even come into existence. Old star maps, stolen from the archives of fallen human colonies, spoke of a long-forgotten world, a place shrouded in legend and mystery. It was said to hold a lost technology, a weapon or power beyond anything the Council had ever seen. If humanity had any chance of survival, they needed to find it. The journey was treacherous, taking them through unknown territories, past rogue planets, and through asteroid fields that could rip their ships apart. But they had no choice. Every day, the enemy grew stronger while humanity faded from existence. They had to act, and they had to do it before the Council realized what they were planning. For months, the last survivors traveled in silence, their ships running dark to avoid detection. Every moment was filled with tension, knowing that a single mistake could lead to their destruction. But the deeper they went into the void, the clearer their path became. The ancient world was real. The legends were true. And as they finally reached its orbit, they saw something that made their blood run cold. The planet was not abandoned. Someone, or something, had been here before. Strange structures, massive and alien in design, stood like silent guardians across the surface. They were unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. And at the heart of it all was a colossal structure, glowing faintly with a power that seemed untouched by time. This was what they had been searching for. This was the key to their survival. But they were not alone. As the first scouting teams landed, they realized the horrifying truth. The ancient world was not just a place of lost knowledge. It was a tomb. The ruins told a story of a forgotten war, of a civilization that had once stood against an enemy so powerful that even time itself could not erase its destruction. And among the wreckage, buried beneath centuries of dust and decay, were the remains of machines. Machines unlike anything the galaxy had ever known. They were massive, armored, and built for war. If humanity could unlock their secrets, they would no longer be the hunted. They would become the hunters. But the deeper they explored, the more they realized the danger they were in. The planet had not been forgotten. It had been hidden. And now, by stepping onto its surface, humanity had awakened something that had been waiting in the dark for far too long. A warning system activated, sending an unknown signal into the depths of space. Eric and his crew knew they had little time. Whatever they had awakened, it would soon bring attention. The Council was already searching for them, desperate to eliminate any survivors before they could rise again. But Eric no longer feared them. He had seen the future, and it was not one where humanity was defeated. It was one where they struck back. With new knowledge in their hands and a plan that would shake the galaxy, The last survivors prepared for war. The Galactic Council thought they had won. But their greatest mistake was believing humanity would stay dead. The storm was coming. And this time, the Council would be the ones to fall. The galaxy had moved on, believing humanity to be nothing more than a painful memory, a race that had risen too fast and been destroyed just as quickly. The Galactic Council had erased their name from the archives, reduced their homeworld to a shadow of its former self, and crushed any resistance before it could begin. But they had made one fatal mistake. They had assumed humanity was gone. In the darkness of the void, hidden from the eyes of their enemies, the last survivors had not only endured but had prepared. And now, after years of silence, they were ready to return. Admiral Eric Vasquez stood on the bridge of the ironclad, staring at the massive fleet assembled before him. What had once been a handful of broken warships had become an armada forged from forgotten technology and ancient secrets. The machines they had uncovered on the lost world had been repaired and modified, their weapons now more advanced than anything the Galactic Council possessed. They had spent years in hiding, gathering strength, rebuilding their forces, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And now, the time had come. Humanity was no longer the hunted. They were the storm that would shake the galaxy to its core. The plan was simple: strike fast, strike hard, and send a message that no one could ignore. Their first target was a heavily fortified outpost on the edge of Council-controlled space, a station that monitored the movement of ships and detected any possible threats. Taking it down would send shockwaves through the galaxy, proving that humanity was not only alive but ready for war. The ironclad led the charge, followed by a fleet of warships that had once been thought lost. They moved like ghosts through the void, undetected until it was too late. When they emerged from the darkness, the station's defenses barely had time to react before the first shots were fired. The battle was brutal and swift. The Council's forces, caught off guard, scrambled to defend themselves, but they were no match for the fury of humanity's return. Ships exploded in brilliant flashes of fire, their hulls torn apart by weapons no one had seen before. The station's shields collapsed under the relentless assault, and within minutes it was over. The outpost was destroyed, and the Council's grip on the sector was shattered. But the attack was not just about destruction. It was a message. A single transmission was sent across the stars, broadcasting to every world, every colony, and every leader who had once believed humanity was gone. The message was clear: we are still here. We remember, and we are coming for you. Panic spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The Council had spent years convincing themselves that the war was over, that humanity was nothing more than a forgotten tragedy. Now they were faced with the terrifying reality that they had not won at all. The survivors had returned, stronger than ever, and they would not stop until justice had been served. Fleets were mobilized, armies prepared, and war councils held desperate meetings to decide how to respond. But deep down, they all knew the truth. This war would not be like the last one. The humans were no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting for vengeance. As Eric and his fleet moved toward their next target, he knew the real battle had only just begun. The Council would throw everything they had to stop them, but it would not be enough. Humanity had learned from their mistakes. They had adapted, evolved, and become something more than anyone had ever expected. The galaxy had forgotten them, but now they would remember. And this time, there would be no mercy. The forgotten warriors had returned, and they would not rest until the Council paid the price for their betrayal. The Galactic Council's worst nightmare had come true. Humanity had returned. For years, they had convinced themselves that the war was over, that the last remnants of the human race had been wiped out, and that no one would dare challenge their rule again. But now, with the destruction of their outpost and the message that echoed across the stars, they knew the truth. The forgotten warriors had risen, and they were coming with a fury that would shake the foundations of the galaxy. Panic spread through the Council's ranks like wildfire. Armies were mobilized, war fleets were deployed, and emergency meetings were held in the grand chambers of the High Council. They had spent decades believing they were safe, and now, for the first time in history, they felt fear. Admiral Eric Vasquez watched from the bridge of the ironclad as his fleet moved toward their next target. The Council's forces had begun to regroup, but they were still underestimating the threat they faced. They thought they were dealing with scattered survivors, a desperate resistance with no real power. They had no idea what was coming. Humanity had not just survived. They had evolved. The ancient war machines they had uncovered had given them an advantage the Council could not predict. Their ships were faster, their weapons deadlier, and their strategies unlike anything the enemy had ever seen. And now, with every battle, they were proving that humanity was no longer the hunted. They were the executioners of those who had betrayed them. The next target was a massive Council-controlled supply station, a hub that provided fuel, weapons, and reinforcements to the enemy fleet. Taking it down would cripple their ability to respond quickly, giving humanity the upper hand in the coming war. The station was heavily defended, surrounded by a fleet of warships that had never lost a battle. The Council believed it was untouchable. Eric and his fleet were about to prove them wrong. As they dropped out of hyperspace, the enemy alarms blared across the system. Fighters launched, warships moved into formation, and the Council's forces prepared to defend what they believed was an impenetrable stronghold. But they had never faced warriors with nothing left to lose. The battle erupted in an instant. Human warships moved like predators in the dark, striking with precision and devastating firepower. Enemy ships were torn apart before they could react, their defenses shattered under the relentless assault. Explosions filled the void, lighting up the battlefield as the Council's fleet struggled to hold the line. Eric stood firm, his orders sharp and decisive, leading the charge with the ruthless efficiency of a man who had spent years preparing for this moment. The ironclad tore through the enemy ranks, its weapons cutting through hulls like paper. One by one, the Council's warships fell, their captains realizing too late that they were facing an enemy far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Within an hour, the once mighty fleet lay in ruins. The supply station, now vulnerable and defenseless, was surrounded. Eric's voice echoed through the communication channels, delivering a simple message. Your time is over. Surrender or be destroyed. The Council officers aboard the station hesitated, knowing that surrender meant humiliation but refusal meant death. One by one, their weapons powered down. The station was taken without another shot fired. Humanity had not just won a battle, they had sent a message to the entire galaxy. The Council's forces were not invincible. Their rule was not absolute. The reckoning had begun. As the human fleet prepared for the next stage of their war, Eric knew there was no turning back. The Council would strike back harder than ever, desperate to crush the uprising before it spread. But he also knew that for the first time, they were afraid. The illusion of their power had been shattered, and now, the real war was about to begin. No longer would humanity be erased from history. No longer would they be hunted and forgotten. The galaxy had betrayed them, and now it was time to make them pay. The reckoning had begun, and there was no force in the universe that could stop it. The Galactic Council had believed themselves to be untouchable, the supreme rulers of the known universe. They had crushed countless civilizations, rewritten history to suit their needs, and erased entire species that dared to defy them. But their greatest crime, their most unforgivable sin, had been the betrayal of humanity. Once, they had seen humans as useful allies, a young but promising race that had much to offer. Yet, when humanity grew too strong, too independent, the Council had turned against them. They had orchestrated a war, framed them as threats, and launched a campaign of extermination. Planets burned, cities fell, and billions died. The Council declared victory, believing humanity had been wiped from existence, but they had been wrong. In the cold void of space, beyond the reach of the Council's spies and war fleets, humanity had survived. Scattered and broken, they had hidden among the ruins of forgotten worlds, rebuilt in the shadows, and prepared for the day they would return. That day had come. The Eclipse, a warship unlike any other, led the charge as humanity struck back. Its hull was forged from stolen Council technology, its weapons enhanced by knowledge taken from the forgotten archives of the ancients. The Council had created their own worst enemy, and now they would pay the price for their betrayal. The target was a heavily fortified Council stronghold, a key command center responsible for coordinating the fleets that maintained their rule. It was a symbol of their dominance, a place where warlords and admirals made decisions that shaped the fate of entire civilizations. Taking it down would send a message, one that no one could ignore. The Eclipse emerged from hyperspace, followed by a fleet of warships carrying the last survivors of humanity. The Council's defenses reacted instantly, scrambling fighters and activating planetary shields. They had expected an attack at some point, but they had not expected this. The speed, the precision, the sheer ruthlessness of humanity's assault caught them completely off guard. The battle began with a thunderous explosion as the Eclipse fired its main cannon, a weapon powered by ancient energy long thought lost. A Council dreadnought, one of the most powerful ships in the galaxy, was torn apart in an instant. Panic spread through the enemy ranks as human warships weaved through their formations, striking with unmatched ferocity. Enemy cruisers fell one after another, their defenses useless against the weapons designed specifically to counter them. Council admirals screamed orders, but it was too late. The fortress that had stood for centuries, the heart of their military power, was crumbling before their eyes. Deep inside the stronghold, Supreme Commander Voth watched the battle unfold, his reptilian hands gripping the edge of the war table. He had always dismissed the possibility of humanity's return as nothing more than paranoid whispers. Now, as explosions rocked the station and alarms blared across the command center, he realized his mistake. How is this possible? He growled, his voice filled with disbelief. They were destroyed. We wiped them out. But the truth was right in front of him. The humans had not been wiped out. They had endured, and now they were here to claim vengeance. With a desperate command, he ordered the activation of the station's last resort, a doomsday weapon designed to wipe out anything within 100 light years. If he could not win, he would make sure that no one did. But the humans had anticipated this. A team of elite operatives had already infiltrated the station, moving through its corridors like ghosts. Led by Captain Sarah Cole, they fought their way to the control center, cutting down guards and disabling security systems with ruthless efficiency. Time was running out, and they knew failure was not an option. As they reached the core of the station, they found the weapon already charging. If it reached full power, it would be the end of them all. With seconds to spare, Sarah hacked into the system, overriding the controls and shutting down the weapon. The station's defenses collapsed, and the Council's forces finally realized the truth: they had lost. As explosions consumed the fortress, Supreme Commander Voth made a desperate attempt to flee, but there was nowhere left to run. A final transmission echoed across the battlefield, his voice filled with rage and fear. You cannot win. The Council will. But the transmission was cut short as the Eclipse fired its last shot, reducing the station to debris. Silence fell over the battlefield. The once mighty fortress was gone, its ruins drifting through space as a monument to the price of betrayal. The remaining Council forces scattered, their morale shattered. The war was not over, but this battle had changed everything. For the first time, the Council knew fear. They had underestimated humanity once before, and they had paid dearly for it. Now, they faced a war unlike any other, a war they had started but could no longer control. As the human fleet regrouped, preparing for the next stage of their campaign, Captain Sarah Cole sent a final message to the galaxy. We were forgotten. We were betrayed. But we have returned, and we will not stop until justice is served. The word spread like wildfire, reaching every world under the Council's rule. Some rejoiced, others trembled. But one thing was certain: the age of the Galactic Council was coming to an end. The price of betrayal had been paid, and humanity was here to collect the rest of the debt.